from the Denver Broncos Media Center, welcome to Broncos Country Tonight with Ryan Edwards and Benjamin Allbright.
Welcome to Broncos Country Tonight. It is here, the NFL Draft. It is draft day. Now, the Broncos will not be selecting a pick in the first round. They're going to be watching highlights of Russell Wilson, which I feel like is a good use of anybody's time. But the Broncos are going to be selecting picks and players this weekend. Of course, we'll talk a little bit about what we expect to see for the Broncos coming up as soon as the second round. But first, Ben, let's talk about some recent news of the Broncos bringing back Melvin Gordon. Up to a $5 million contract on a one-year deal. What did you think about the move? And what does it say about the Broncos' intentions coming up in the draft?
Well, I know Melvin wanted it, but didn't think it was going to happen. Didn't think the money was going to be right. I think both sides didn't think that was going to come together, and it just kind of has over the last week or so. It was Melvin had other offers, other visits with other teams, but he loves the city of Denver. Wanted to be in Denver. Wanted to be a Bronco. Wanted to be with Russ, and I think it's good for the team. I think Melvin's being back is good for the Broncos as a whole. I know there are people that are going to be disappointed in the split with the backfield, but I think overall that it's a good thing for the team at large. Melvin will be probably a little bit more of a situational runner this year than maybe a primary feature back. I mean, still going to get his carries, but last year they had the dead even split with him and Javonte. I think this year is probably a little more tilt to Javonte. But I think that early on, it just depends on how quickly Javonte gets caught up into this blocking scheme. He grasps how to run in the outside zone. Melvin has experience in it. And if it takes Javonte a while, then you could see more early season carries from Melvin Gordon and then kind of phase to Javonte down the stretch.
I feel like George Paton has done a really good job. I feel like you say this on every single video, but he's done a really good job of whatever perceived weakness that could pop up. He's given himself a bit of a hedge. Did that with Kareem Jackson, brought him in. Might be the starter, might be Caden Stearns, but either way, at least that's not a position where you're going to be desperate if there's an injury happening. Same thing with running back. And I know they like Mike Boone, right? But again, it's a position that gets banged up. The running back position takes a lot of hits, and we expect Javonte Williams to take a big leap forward. I agree with you, by the way, that Javonte is probably the guy that's going to get the first crack at being a bit more the heavy workload 60-40 kind of split with Melvin Gordon. But understanding something that's a position that gets banged up, now you don't have to come into the draft saying, boy, if we don't get our top two or three guys or in that range, then we got to consider what our options are. I think this is a great deal for both sides. And I sort of feel like the Broncos, who are going to need to lean on the run at some point this year, multiple points. I've been making that case on Broncos Country Tonight, the radio show. It's a good deal for everybody.
Yeah, I think that, ideally, you'll want to be able to rely on both these guys to salt away leads.
Yes.
And for Melvin, that's going to be making sure you take care of the rock. For Javonte, that's going to be making sure you're not getting banged backwards for negative yardage on carries that, 3 or 4 carries before you rip one off. There's got to be some consistency with making sure you're getting positive yardage. So there are things for each of these guys to work on. But I think overall, having the platoon of both them plus Mike Boone makes for a healthier backfield.
Absolutely. Okay, so again, there are draft implications, not so much here in the first round that's happening tonight, but draft implications for the Broncos heading into day 2, day 3, so on and so forth. So for what we expect now to happen here on day 2, you did your mock draft. You put it out there at broncoscountrytonight.com, and you have the Broncos selecting Nick Bonitto, the edge rusher out of Oklahoma.
Yeah, I think he'd be a good fit here. He start off as a rotational guy, can work his way up. He's got a natural Denver nickname built in with Nick Casa Bonitto. I just think that
that's going to play really well here on this video. I know,
and it should. I think that I think overall, I think it's that could be a good pick. I don't know that necessarily they're locked in on that. I think there are a lot of players that they like kind of in that range, and they're excited to kind of see how things shake out. Maybe it's a Chad Muma, maybe it's a McCreary, the corner out of Auburn. So there are players in that range that I think that they like, and I think they're just going to kind of wait and let the board come to them.
And you sort of have to. You don't really have much of a choice. George Paton has been talking about that. He talked about that at his press conference last week, that you can only predict so much up to that point because, well, Nick Bonitto might go at the beginning of the second round, and all of a sudden that shifts your plans. Or, as you just mentioned, several players, you might get to pick 64 and say, boy, we could trade back a few picks and get one of these guys, and we're pretty thrilled about it.
And that would be the ideal situation. You got 4 or 5 guys you believe are blue chip guys, and you can move back a few picks and pick up even more picks And some of that maybe roll forward, some of that maybe in this draft, who knows, but really multiply and take full advantage of your assets and the board if you've got 4 or 5 guys you believe in.
And you mentioned edge, you mentioned linebacker. I know we've talked a lot about offensive tackle there in that range as well. And sometimes I feel like we do project a little bit on what we think they're going to do based on what we see as perceived needs. But once again, it bears repeating. The Broncos have put themselves in position now, including this addition of Melvin Gordon, where they don't really have any substantial needs. They just have more roster depth needs, maybe long-term development needs.
Yeah. I agree. And I think that if you look at the way that this draft is stacked and the way that the Broncos have needs, this draft is actually kind of a perfect marriage for what the Broncos need out of this draft. So I think that this is going to be fun. Maybe not for the casual fan, as that they may not know, but for the hardcore draftniks, I think this is going to be a real fun draft for them.
And one of our listeners for the radio show reached out on Twitter, Adam, and he said something that I thought was kind of an interesting point. As you mentioned, sort of the casual fans versus the hardcore draft people. There's a little bit of bell curve there on the level of intrigue. But he brought up something about how it's the first time in years that he hasn't really done a deep dive on a lot of these players because he just kind of feels a lot of confidence in George Payton, a lot of confidence in the direction the Broncos are going, and sort of feeling like, hey, there's a lot of talent that's going to be available around there. I'm not so much freaking out about, gosh, they have to get this guy. I think you and I think people that really get into this, we get excited about our #myguys. Mm-hmm. But I think that you're right. For most fans, they're thinking, okay, the board's going to fall, whatever it's going to do. The Broncos are going to good player. They're not looking for a starter anyways at this spot. Maybe a starter by year 2, year 3, but they're looking for a starter in year 1 at pick 64. And I think that changes a little bit of the way you frame what you're looking at versus last year at pick number 9. You needed a guy that had an immediate impact.
Yeah, I think I want to be careful in the way we phrase that because you're looking for guys that are going to be starters. You may not project them to start, like you pointed out, you may not project them to start year 1, but you're never looking for backups. So I want to make sure we're clear on that.
I wasn't intending to say.
No, I'm not trying to correct you on that. I'm just trying to say, I don't think that people are, sometimes people jump into, well, what about, you draft this guy to be a backup? You don't draft a guy to be a backup. You draft him to be an eventual starter. And that's sometimes true. He gets, so that's, I'm trying to clarify there because I get jumped on sometimes.
Well, but the same thing came up last year with Pat Surtain because the Broncos had already made pretty heavy investments at cornerback with Kyle Fuller and Ronald Darby. And people were like, why are you drafting a guy that's going to be a backup? And that you're 100% right. People get in weird kind of reframing the conversation just to fit their narrative. And that's a great point you bring up because that is not at all what they're looking for. They're looking for guys that will inevitably take over as starters. But in the very short term, they don't need to draft a starter.
Yeah, you don't need that contribution right now. That's just a bonus. So,
but if you have an injury, then hopefully you draft a guy that can get there quicker.
And you are one play away from maybe that guy being the starter. So that's why the attitude always has to be we're trying to get the best, get starters and get the best guy.
And by the way, again, coming back to the Pat Surtain pick, as we are 1 year removed from that pick, my goodness, how great does that look right now? As we sit here today and the Broncos have one of those starting positions locked up, and the level of confidence is very, very high in him being CB1. If they hadn't done that, we'd be talking about Ronald Darby, Michael Ojemudia, who are very good players, but at least right now aren't the guys you're probably saying, okay, the Broncos are set. They don't need to add to that room.
Yeah, I think you would have them keyed in on the corner if that were the case. So,
they can take a corner, by the way. They can take a corner.
1 year later, I just remember on draft day, was laughing at me because I said it was the right pick, and now, now I think people have come around on it. But
you spiking the football? When does that ever happen?
It never occurs. So it's not going to spike itself. So no, I just I'm looking forward to this. I really am. I think this is going to be. I think it's going to be a good draft for the Broncos, and I think they're going to. Improve the roster. I really do, and so I'm looking forward to it.
All right, really excited. Of course, we'll have plenty of breakdown coming up next week on Broncos Country Tonight, the radio show, right here on Broncos Country Tonight TV. For Benjamin Allbright, I'm Ryan Edwards. Thanks for watching.